Welcome guys, Jay from rg552 here, and after doing a video recently on the rg553, a great budget handheld by Anbernic, being the first for this channel, what else do Anbernic provide that uppens the game? This is the rg552. It was out before the rg503, but it is packing that more power and features. Well, I have to give it a rg552 review, don't I? Though this handheld was out about 5 months ago to the making of this video, it did get somewhat slated and was pushing a higher price tag. Now it is sitting at a further reasonable cost for me to jump on board and find out if it's now worth it. I had some decent expectations of this device as it is made by Anbernic, which makes me wonder if most of its problems was that initial release price. In this video I will be focusing on the Android side of things and doing some quick testing, pushing some demanding systems emulated with a straight out of the box experience. And perhaps at the end of this video you may find out this may be the product for you, even though there's a lot of competition out there. This is now available at that newer lower price from the UK with international shipping provided by the link below. Oh, and hitting that subby and hitting that like will be much appreciated if this is your style of content. But first, let's quickly run through an unboxing and find out what you get with your purchase, and later we'll talk about was it necessary for this handheld to be originally slated and pushed on the side, or can this beastly Anbernic be reprimanded? As you can see, this is the 64GB black model. We've got information of all the buttons, and then we've got all the specs, but I'll put in more detail later on in the video. Let's open up and see what we get all together in this box. So we do have its own power unit, so we got the UK adapter there that should clip on top. Now this is a fast charging, more power plug that is provided, unlike a lot of the other Anbernic devices. So this will give it that fast charge. Around about an hour to a half will give it the necessary full battery. Now what else do we have inside this box? Let's just see. And we got some more protective wrapping, which is great to see. This will be nicely delivered to you. We got the micro C cable, and this is pretty well built cable, I have to say. Better than some other cables I've picked up. And then we got the two SD cards. As you can see, now this one is the 64GB and the previous one was the 16GB. That is for the other Linux OS. And what else we got? We have the screen protector, and we got some screen wipes. And the manual here is pretty handy because there's a lot of details on the function buttons, so I'll be looking into that later on. Now let's get this beast on show, shall we? Well, it's a little heavier than I expected and does have some marks on the screen, but that's just from packaging. My first impression is that this is a very well built handheld, something that you would find from a high branded company. At the base of this handheld you have the speakers, two SD card slots, a reset and function button to trigger those function keys. We have rounded edges as well with a protective sprayed plastic casing, not those shiny aluminium ones that this could give off that impression. On the right hand side we have the power button that is sticking out quite slightly. It may cause some accidental triggering, but more of a hands-on approach to get a better verdict on that. On the top we have the triggers lined up that are micro switched, making it easy and quite comfortable to trigger. Next to a cooling vent, then we have a mini HDMI out, which is pretty awesome to see, a headphone jack, two micro Cs, which is one for the OTG connectivity and one for the power. Don't get them confused, or you'll be wondering why my handheld hasn't got any juice when I've been plugged in for hours. We have the volume buttons on the left hand side that have a slight wiggle to them and could cause some accidental triggering, but I better get a better understanding with more use. At the back of the handheld now we do have that grille and that fan exposure, which is quite a questionable placement really, as your hands could be sitting on top of that. We also have some comfortable grip pads as well to make it more secure in your hands. Well, I can't stress how great the D-pad and the buttons feel on this handheld, and the analog sticks are just great, a very smooth quality type of feel. I must say it's probably the best experience that I've had with one of these devices. So now let's quickly touch up on its specs. It has a 5.36 1080p IPS touchscreen, so this screen is going to be pretty awesome. The GPU is an RK399 with a 1.8 processing speed, but this can be overclocked to 2.2 with later updates, which I'll mention later on in the video. It does have 64GB built in and come with a 64GB of storage card, as well as another SD card to change your OS. It has 4GB of LD DDR4 RAM and it has Wi-Fi 2.5 GHz. So if you go on to do that online streaming of your PC, you may have a bit of struggles. But for me personally, I'm not a fan of streaming my games. I just rather use the device. It doesn't have Bluetooth, which is a bit of a shame because a lot of other devices do prior to this. But with that OTG, we may be able to get some good compatibility with this. The battery is 6400 milliamps, 3200s built in, so this battery will last you for a good 5 to 6 hours of gameplay depending on the demand that you're giving it. The SD card slot can support up to 512 gigabytes. I'm not sure if both of them could accept that because you can get about a terabyte of storage on this, which is pretty awesome. On the Linux side, it will boot straight into an EmuELEC, so everything is ready to go. With the Android, it is supporting 7.1. One thing to notice is its weight. This is definitely one of the heavier handhelds that I've experienced. By having the Android system built in, I have access to both the SD card slot. For myself and my setup, I got the 64GB on the left and 128 on the right. I personally use the larger SD for disk-based images. One major plus for this anbernic on Android is its compatible Play Store games. This is running on version 7, so it's quite outdated, but we can get some decent titles to run on this. Personally, I'm not a mobile gamer, but having this device that has some titles I will be now investing some gaming time in, thanks to its controller compatible games. Though it won't be running the latest and greatest games at full FPS and resolution, due to its power compatibility and the Android version, we can still push some of these bigger titles at the low settings that are playable. This has now opened and started up a new gaming platform for myself to get into. With the emulation side of things, let's jump straight into a system that people are after, the N64. I'll skip the previous generation of systems, as in a quick summary, they run great, especially with this control layout here and looking mighty fine with the IPS screen, a seller in its own right. Using the RetroArch Core Parallel 64 and built-in Mubeam 64 Plus, we are getting some great results, though I do find that the N64 OID app is a great alternative. One thing to bear in mind is with the original N64 console, a lot of these titles would barely run at 30 FPS, and the PAL console would be pushing at 25 PS, so good emulation would imitate that. In my experience, I was getting around about 30 FPS with most of these titles, with some minor dips here and there, much like the original hardware, so I was just jumping from other apps and also the RetroArch to get the best type of experience. Most games are very playable, and GoldenEye and Perfect Dark just look absolutely gorgeous with this screen, with that widescreen enabled as the game has that feature built in. So pretty great experience, to be honest. As you can tell, I am still pretty new to widescreen emulation with handhelds, and it is a treat. If you have something to play and run the N64, this rg552 is recommended. Carrying on with widescreen gaming, widescreen modes using the SNES HD core for the Super Nintendo and the Genesis HD core for the Mega Drive, it is pretty stunning here. Though only a selective amount of titles can run decent, especially for the Super Nintendo, but it's definitely more compatibility and better steady frame rates with the Sega Mega Drive, but it all depends on the title. But either way, it's still a lot of fun and something to keep an eye out on. One personal thing that I am after with emulation handhelds is better performance with enhancements on PlayStation 1. Though the system runs great with PlayStation 1 games using the RetroArch Rear Med Core, using the Duck Emulator, a highly praised app, we can get away with running some titles with ×2 resolution and just about getting away with ×3, and they look awesome. But there's just not the experience with all titles. And one of my favorite titles can barely run with ×1 resolution using Duck. Unfortunately, this is not a consistent experience throughout all the titles. I even tried using RetroArch's Duck Core and they just came out worse. So here we're getting a few titles that I've tested to run ×2 and ×3 resolution with enhancements on, and some titles that just need an alternative emulator to run smooth. Not the experience I was personally after, but either way, PS1 still runs great. Now let's talk Dreamcast, another system the rg553 struggled with, and using the built-in Redream app, the Dreamcast runs very well, so you can tick that compatibility box. But for even the purchased version, you can push out a ×2 resolution on a fair few of these titles and it still runs really smooth. And with that widescreen hack on using that cheat mode, again it is a treat for the eyes on this device. There was this one title that did struggle to keep up the FPS, but putting it down to ×1 resolution did resolve a bit of this, but hopefully some updates can just handle some of this emulation a bit better. One emulator for a console that has made some strides recently is the Sega Saturn. Again, I tested out a handful of titles and they are looking and running pretty great as well. There are some rendering issues with some of these titles, but we are getting that FPS that we need. The app seems to natively like to apply the resolution to match the same as the screen, so that is pretty high resolution. So you want to change the settings to original resolution and this clears up the FPS. There was no luck using RetroArch Sega Saturn emulation, but using that dedicated Yabu Sanshiro that is built in with the system, this is where you get the better results. Well, quickly, let's touch on the DS side of things by using Drastic app. This is a huge improvement of DS emulation than using the rg552. I can have the settings to high 3D rendering with frame skip off and games are running like butter. And finally, we have a touchscreen, so this is more of a great experience. Though there are some games that are a pain to emulate just because how they were first designed. There are some of these games that are modded to counter-attack to use these controls. Soon I will head into the final verdict of this handheld and some of its problems, and as always I'd love to hear from your experience if you're a lucky owner of one of these in the comments box below. But first, let's talk about the last and favourite system I like to run on this device, which is the PSP, which really makes this handheld shine. Thanks to the makers of the app PPSSPP, I recommend heading to this store and downloading the gold version just to give them the support. This handheld is completely designed for the PSP, especially with the quality buttons and its convenient layout. For the titles that I have tested, the frame rate was very consistent, making some games being able to push at ×2 or even ×3 resolution if they were more of a 2D based type of game. And they do look awesome with that frame skip off to give you that smoother experience. I can't seem to stand that frame skip. But for the AAA titles that are pretty heavy on the 3D, I do recommend checking it on ×1. But that's only needed for a very minor amount of titles. By using Android OS, using a HDMI out to your main screen is as simple as plug and play, though a mini to HDMI is sold separately, and you can find a link purchased below if you're interested. With full HD and OTG support, this will now be my favourite main setup. Still a shame there is no Bluetooth support though. Okay, now that I've shown you its capabilities, now let's touch on its faults, which is coming from an open mind and taking account of its new lower price. The button layout and speaker placement eventually has grown on me, and almost 2 weeks of use I can still say that it holds as one of the best quality front facing buttons that I have used on a portable device. The power and volume buttons ended up not being much of a hindrance, which was to my surprise. Just the volume button could have done with a slightly further sturdier feel. The battery life has not yet been an issue, it's still early days. The fact that it does not come with Bluetooth is a bit of a letdown, but there are plenty of ways to get around this with wireless controllers for the OTG. But we should not have to put up with that. Wi-Fi 2.5 I can't really complain about, as my intentions of this is not to stream my games, but I know there are a fair few people out there that this could potentially affect. The L2 and R2 size and placement I know would become a problem, but was not as much as I thought it would be. It depended on what system that I was using. For me, it was the PlayStation 1, N64 and some Android games. I do really like how they tackle this on the later model of the 503. When it comes to software problems, I would say the quickest and best way to get up your retro games is to use the Linux emulec with the SD card that is provided, and you can just put your ROMs on there. Then to use the N64, DC and PC games, the more hardware pushing, use the Android system. The handheld does come built in with a lot of emulators for each system when you boot up the Android. For me, I do like to use my front end and set up Dig, because that is my favourite. I found you could not link up the Mega CD, so that was a bit of a problem using RetroArch, but when I used Launchbox front end, it seemed to work fine. With the systems that I did use and set up with Dig, everything else was okay. Initially, the weight of the handheld I thought would become a problem as it's slightly in the heavy zone. After long usage, it did become across more of a quality, comfortable feel. A couple of grams off though won't go amiss. Perhaps I'll just take out the rumble. Personally, I'm just not a fan of rumble in a handheld device. Every time that you boot up the device, it always seems to kick in the fan and set it to max for about a few seconds. That just annoys me. Why? There's no need. An update could amend that. Anbernic's lack of dedicated launcher does seem, I would say, a little bit lazy. The ATV one does a bit of a fine job, to be honest. It's a minor choppy experience from time to time, and some setting up is needed. All in all, this device offers a lot to us and is a nice upgrade from the rg552 model. With this you are all set up and ready to go, especially if you're using the Linux side. If you like a video on that, let me know in the comment section below, but going with Android is how you get the most out of it. I can understand how this originally got slated because of that price and the Android minor problem to help trigger that, but now with my hands on this and getting a better understanding, this is a cracking quality device that most definitely is a competitor. Some updates will not go amiss, and it does still hold up with its compatibilities. I'm also working on some up and coming videos regarding official and non-official updates, so keep an eye on that. Well, I hope it didn't come across that much bias as this item is featuring on the web store. I hope I met you guys a bit in the middle here. I'm a big fan of these retro gaming handhelds and I think they're pretty awesome and I can't wait to see what the future brings. This video is a bit longer than intended, but there's a lot more information I wanted to try and get out there for you. I will try and keep these videos a bit shorter in the future. So as always, if you like these videos, hit that button. If you want to help me support this channel, click subscribe, leave a comment below, and I'll catch you lot on the next video.